Ladies and gentlemen, it's been 2+ years since the last time I did a best leaderships tier list video, and since then we've gotten tons of new characters and uniforms, so it's time to catch up. Now, as there are over 260 characters in the game and tons of uniforms, I had to boil it down. So this is not an exhaustive list of all like 500 plus leaderships. It's just the best 101. It's still a lot of leaderships. I think it covers all the bases, but just as a shout out to 5 characters or 6 that are not on this list: Anti-Man, Victorious, Ghost, Goliath, Moon Girl, and Gambit. We'll miss you. Anyways, I've pre-written out all of the different categories and we'll explain them as we go along. I have a lot of work to do and we got to go through this really fast because time is not on my side. So let's get right into it. Kicking it off at the bottom, we have the defense/ignore dodge tier. Now these characters provide you a big chunk of either ignore dodge or defense, anywhere from 45 to 50%. So that's a very big number, and it's going to help you mostly in either specific PvE content or specific PvP content. To quickly recap, Strife, Gilgamesh, Blue Marvel, Swordmaster, and Heimdall are all defense leaderships with a little bit of ignore dodge as well on Heimdall, and then the rest, Spider-Man 29, Domino, Cable, Robbie, and then Proxima all give ignore dodge, with Proxima adding some crit damage. These are, like I said, not the most useful out there, but still useful in certain situations. You know, Strife as a potential leadership for PvP because he also has the cleanse on his passive. We know Proxima's lead can be good for ABX and ABL at times. Robbie, same thing, buffing up Ghost Rider's ignore dodge. And then, of course, you can, in some cases, use Gilgamesh, Blue Marvel, Swordmaster, and Heimdall for lesser tiered AC combat. The next category, PvP niche, is exactly how it sounds. These are leaderships that don't really fit into any other categories, and there's not that many of them, but I still wanted to highlight them because they have some value in the game, and I'll talk about them individually once I've sourced all of them from this absolutely massive list. It's really hard to get through at first. We have Dormammu with the very unique 60% increased damage to all superheroes. It's a very, very powerful effect, but it has almost no play these days because of how weak Dormammu is, and also that it only applies to supervillain allies. But you can bet yourself that if we get another PvP, PvE type game mode like Danger Room, or if we get a PvE boss that's a hero, once in a blue moon, or if he gets a new uniform tier 4, that this leadership will come back into play because it helps check all heroes, which is very, very powerful. Then you have Drax and Captain America just with generic amounts of HP. And then you have Angel with an interesting one, only because his seasonal uniforms passive gives you debuff. Otherwise, it wouldn't really be used in PvP at all. But because the passive is there, it allows his leadership to shine, which is 50% recovery rate and 30% dodge, I believe, to all allies, which is, again, very niche, but still pretty good. The next one, Debuff, is the longest and most important for PvP. These are characters who have the debuff cleanse leadership, which is super important, as you know of, in PvP, because it basically stops your character for a set amount of time from being debuffed by anything. You know, snare, stun, fear, paralyze, panic, etc. These are, basically everywhere these days on PvP metas, so it can be difficult to really calculate which one is the best. I'm going to do my best to rank them all after I have put them all up here in terms of, I think, their use and their sort of power. Purely from the perspective of the leadership, I think the list looks something like this, in the sense that the best overall debuff leadership is probably Molecule Man, followed by Echo. Now again, both of these characters pale in comparison to the actual power of characters like Silver Surfer, Madeline, and even Black Swan, but just talking about their leaderships in a vacuum, these two characters have insanely powerful leaderships because they both combine the classic debuff cleanse with amazing additional properties, where Molecule Man gives you chain hit reduction and I believe reflect reduction, or that might be on his passive, and then Echo, of course, gives 60% increased attack and defense to all speed allies, which is insanely good stat value. Now from there, it sort of lowers down with characters like Thane and Silver Surfer just giving you the debuff cleanse with a little bit of attack or a little bit of defense, or in Mephisto's case, cleanse with some fire damage. And then you have, of course, very niche cleanses like Luke Cage's, which only applies to the Defender's allies. And I believe, I think his applies with a defense buff as well, but it applies to all allies as well. In any event, yeah, these leaderships are mostly interchangeable. There's not a humongous difference between them. There is one missing from this list that you're probably shouting at your screen right now. Where's Thanos? Where's Thanos? He'll be coming later on on the list because his is a little bit stronger than just a cleanse, and by far his would be the strongest if you combine the value of the leadership with the value of the character. But of course, if you were to re-rank this based on how strong the characters are, then yes, Molecule Man would drop down substantially, as would Echo. The list would look honestly very similar to this. It would just be that those two very powerful leads would drop because the characters themselves, in terms of their damage and what else they bring to the team, are not really carrying the weight of everything else. The next category, niche, essentially are buffs that are very strong but apply to a very small subset of characters. So in Ultron's case, it only applies, I think it's 55% attack, which is very good, but it only applies to technokinetic allies. So that's one ability in the game. It's not even an entire race of characters like all mutants or all Inhumans. It's just that smaller subset of just the machine allies, the technokinetics. Similarly, with someone like Null, you have 60% attack, which is really, really strong, but because it only applies to symbiotes, only applies to Inhumans, it is a very limited, or in my opinion, niche effect. Again, niche doesn't mean bad, it just means that you have to be careful because, for example, like Carnage is a really good debuff lead. You just got to be careful because it only applies to symbiotes, right? Just like Blue Dragon, or not Blue Dragon actually, Spider-Woman has debuff cleanse as well, but it's only applying to the Spider-Verse characters. So while it is good, very good, it only applies to a small group of characters. So I wanted to differentiate these from other leaderships and also from the general debuff leaderships. If I'm actually thinking about it now, the general debuff leaderships are actually better because they apply to all allies in almost all cases, or they apply to like all heroes or all villains. But these niche ones, again, like I said, apply to a very, very small set of characters. You have other examples like Iron Fist, which applies to only the Defenders allies. So it's literally 4 characters in the game. The Fantastic Four one for Mr. Fantastic is, again, like 6 or 7 characters in the game. It's a very, very small number. So that basically just describes all of these sort of niche leaderships. Rounding out the list of niche, we have Blade, Wendell, Homelander Vaughn, Electro, War Machine, Hulkbuster with the juicy 105% increased attack to only Iron Man, Icarus, Arachnite, and the rest that we added from the beginning. Super small category here, but also important to note. I didn't really feel like there was any way of putting them in another category and explaining it in a way that made sense. These are self-lead only characters, and I should actually add that as a sort of highlight there. And there's only 3 characters. It's a very specific list here, but once I put Thor there, you'll understand exactly what I'm saying. Now, again, there are other characters that meet this criteria. Absolutely. Like, for example, you could argue that Black Bolt meets this criteria because there are no other good Inhumans right now. Well, there's Stain, but that's it. But the thing is, his leadership doesn't say Black Bolt only. His leadership says all Inhumans. So if there are any Inhumans in the future, that will work. The reason why I put Ghost Rider, Thor here, besides Miles Morales, the reason why I put these 2 here is because their leaderships give them a stat that normally is very bad, which is lightning resist and fire resist. But they specifically and almost exclusively can convert that resistance into damage using their artifacts. Now, there may be other characters in the future that get this exact ability, and there are other characters that have this ability with other elements, like Luna with cold, but currently, no one else can take advantage of that lightning damage, that lightning conversion from resistance to damage, besides Thor. So technically, his lead is self-lead only. Same thing goes for Ghost Rider. In Miles' case, his leadership just literally says Miles only. Again, I know there are a lot of other characters that are self-lead only, like Mystique and Mr. Sinister, but those are very straightforward. I also wanted to include Miles here so I can mention that his previous uniform, the Anniversary one, only applies to Spider-Man, so he's in a very weird position where he either buffs himself a ton or he buffs Peter Parker a ton. So I just wanted to put him there as an additional one. But yeah, I do feel like Thor and Ghost Rider deserve to be mentioned because otherwise I see a lot of people asking the question like, why am I using Thor lead? It's so bad. You do need the artifact in order for that to work. Ghost Rider actually doesn't need the artifact. His artifact gives him immortality, but he uses the conversion through his tier 4. So that's just the way that works. Like the last category, the dispatch category is very specific, but also very important to highlight because certain characters just make this work and it otherwise doesn't make any sense when you use these leaderships in other content. So it's worth sitting here for 10 seconds and explaining it. We have the following 3 characters: White Fox, Enchantress, and Dr. Voodoo. All of these, I believe, can work without their uniform, so they can work with their base kits. Because they all have increased debuff effect leaderships for all, I believe, all allies. And this is very powerful for dispatch. It's also very powerful for any other PvE content where you can apply all defense down buffs. I know it's a mouthful, but essentially, if you can apply all defense down buffs to enemies, then these leaderships, these dispatch leaderships are good. If you can't apply debuffs like in World Boss Legend and Legend Plus, etc., ABX, ABL, then these leaderships are unfortunately not good. That's essentially how it works, but they have a clear use case, and so that's why they need to be mentioned in their own category. The final 4 categories are all variations on the same idea, which is that these are leaderships that are very good because they provide a big buff to either attack or damage. The only difference is I wanted to differentiate between the different types of either attack or damage based on what the leadership is requiring you to do. I know that sounds like weird, so you basically just have to look at the readings to understand what I'm trying to say. The best leaderships in the game are the ones that scale your damage, to which for the most part is elemental, but there is one exception to this. After that, the very high percentage all attack, all allies leaderships, or just attack all allies leaderships, are the next most powerful. And for that cutoff, I went with 35% and up, besides Moongirl. And then these next 2 ones are essentially the same as the pink one, but they have either 1 or 2 conditions. I pre-filled out the 2 condition one with Gamora, Titania, Star-Lord, Ironheart, Riri Williams, Ancient One, Kingpin, and Sif to explain this with visuals. So these leaderships are all very good, and they have very high, sometimes very, very high stat bonuses for attack, for HP, etc. But they have 2 conditions. So let's check it out. Gamora's applies to only speed allies, that's 1 condition, and it only buffs physical attack, that's 2 conditions. So this is not going to buff Luna at all, even though she's a speed type, because it buffs physical attack and she's an energy attack scaling character. Likewise, this isn't going to help someone like Moon Knight, who does scale physical attack, but is not a speed type. He's a combat type, excuse me. So yeah, that's why there's 2 conditions. Likewise with Titania, it's only combat types and it's only physical attack. Star-Lord, Ironheart, and Ancient One are all the same. It's only energy attack and only for blast types. Then Kingpin is only for supervillains, and it's a combination of physical attack and HP, which is very good. I believe it's like 40% physical attack and 30% HP, which is a lot of stats, but it's only for villains, which cuts out like half the characters in the game. And finally, Sif, who scales with physical attack only for combat types. So that would be great for someone like Black Panther or Gladiator, but it wouldn't be so great for someone like Iron Fist, who, although is a combat type, doesn't scale with physical attack. He scales with energy attack. So with that out of the way, we can now get to the much larger list of the 35+% leaderships that are very strong but have at least 1 condition. And that 1 condition obviously holds them back from being more universally utilized. So again, these are very, very good leaderships. You just have to be careful because they're not utilized. You can't just slap them on for any ally. And this is where we're going to see the big boy Thanos. And you can ignore Farmer here. I left him on by accident. We're only going to be ranking one of the Thanoses in this video. So yeah, for example, Black Cat and Zemo have the exact same leadership. It's only for villain allies, but it gives you 65% attack and 35% ignore dodge. That is insane, but it's only for half the characters in the game. Likewise, Nick Fury, only for heroes, which is good, but could be better, but it does provide a very juicy 60% attack effect. Ronin's just for universals, and of course Thanos with the debuff and the attack and the all defense is probably one of the best in the game in terms of just raw numbers, but unfortunately, like I said, it only applies to villains. Abomination applies to all allies, I believe, but it's only physical attack. Correction. Abomination applies to combat types, but it's all attack, so that's nice. Next, we have the quintuple mutant leaderships, starting with Kitty Pryde and ending with Exodus, that give anywhere from 60% attack down to 50% when you scale with multiple mutants for Exodus. But yeah, it does range from 60 down to 50 down to 45. I forgot actually that Magic's new leadership does give 45% attack to all mutant allies. And then, yeah, Exodus can technically go higher than Magic and Polaris, but you have to bring 3 mutants, so it's a little bit more conditional than the other ones that just give a flat amount. Then you have Medusa that gives all universal types attack, which is great because it's only 1 condition, but yeah. And then you have Shuri, which applies all attack to speed types, which is really good because it means she can apply to, you know, both energy types like Luna, but also, you know, physical damage types with which most speed types are, like Miles or Spider-Man or whoever else. And then rounding out the list, we have Hope, who is the lowest percentage. Now here for Hope, I know it's actually not 35%, it's 30%, but I did want to include her because she is a leadership for some content, and she is used for quite a lot of content, so she is meta, and it will come up in conversation, but I know she's a super expensive character. You wouldn't just get her for a leadership. I'm fully aware of that. Now we come to the 2 best categories here, 35% attack plus for all allies. So this is pretty straightforward, but these are some of the best leaderships in the game. just because they are like just so insanely flexible, So Gladiator, I believe it's 60% attack to all allies, which is just absolutely nuts. Then I actually forgot, but Thena's is really good too. It's all allies. It's 50% attack and 20% all defense, which is crazy. And then as much as Hyperion sucks, his leadership is great too. I believe it's either 50 or 55% increase all attack to all allies. Just everybody gets it. Just everybody. It's crazy. Then of course we have one of the classics. We have Red Goblin with the all allies 40% attack and 40% ignore dodge. Very, very strong. A lot of people forget about this, but Deadpool's got an all allies leadership with attack and defense and all speed, which is very strong. Everybody's familiar with Cyclops, although his passive is energy attack only. His leadership is all attack for all allies and all defense, which is very, very nice for a lot of content, mostly PvE. You have a Hela with the 60% energy attack to all allies. Now, this is technically a condition because it's only energy attack, but it is for all allies. So, yeah, some people are going to disagree and think it should be a condition. I sort of decided, you know what, if it says all allies, then this is an all allies type ability, even if it's just one type of attack. So, yeah. Obviously, the first like 6 are much stronger because they're all allies and all attack, so that includes physical and energy. After Cyclops, it obviously gets quite a bit less valuable from Hela down. They're still good, no doubt about it. They're still good, but they're just not as universally applicable, right? Like you can literally, one of these 6 leaderships, literally just apply it to anyone in the game, anyone, right? After that, yeah. So I would say it's arguable. I'm not saying that I would have this opinion, but it is arguable that these are the best leaderships in the game. These 6 right here, because they're very high attack numbers and they apply to everyone in the game. So they're universally valuable leaderships. Then we have Havoc with, I believe, 50 or 55% energy attack to all allies. We have a forgotten character, Scarlet Witch, with the energy 45%, I believe. Doctor Strange's is a little bit higher on the list because his also provides 20 or 25% ignore dodge to allies, which is quite nice. I thought they said something in the patch notes about buffing Ebony's leadership from 40% energy to 50 for all allies, but it's still 40%, so that's where he is. Wasp, I know, is not 35, it's 30, but it also includes all defense and all speed. It's still useful, and again, it's used sort of like in a Hope Summers kind of way. Actually, most of the rest of these are not technically all 35 plus, but they're useful in different ways, like photons or spectrums that has 24% ignore dodge, I believe, something like that. And then, of course, Wave's leadership used for, in some cases, ABX, although it's only 24% if you don't have, like, Misty or whatever. Sins is also lower at 24%, but again, she's used in content. And then M'Baku, same sort of thing. It's a low percentage for sure, but it's used in some content. And rounding it out, we have Captain Marvel. This is sort of like a mix between a lower leadership, obviously it's 30%, and a self-lead type of situation. But yeah, finally we get to the increased damage. So for those of you that don't know, the way that scaling works in Marvel Future Fight, it's much easier to get attack scaling than it is to get damage scaling. And attack scaling in the calculation that is done to basically see how much damage you do, attack comes very early in the calculation and damage comes at the end. So scaling damage is a lot more powerful and a lot more effective than scaling attack. However, there are very few ways to scale damage. So because of that, almost all of these leaderships are elemental damage. So that's sort of the theme here, because there just aren't any damage leaderships in the game. There's actually only one sort of generic damage leadership. You could even consider it a conditional leadership, but it is She-Hulk's. So in some ways, She-Hulk has the best leadership in the game. In other ways, it's conditional, but it does scale everyone's damage against male characters. So that's the condition. It has to be, you have to be fighting a male character, but it doesn't matter if it's PvP or PvE. It doesn't matter if the enemy is a villain or a hero, as long as they are male. And of course, scaling damage just generically is easily one of the most powerful things you can do. Every damage proc scales your damage, right, with an energy or destruction or whatever. And that's also why the elemental leaderships are so powerful, because they also scale your elemental damage. And so for elemental damage dealing characters, it's pretty nutty. So you got fire damage scaling on Satana and Goatman, Beta Ray Bill. You also have fire damage on Echo. Echo's the only character that actually deserves to have both mentioned, because they're so radically different, because Echo's uniformed leadership is cleanse and damage, like attack defense for speed types, but then her no uniform leadership is just straight up fire damage, which is very, very good, and also radically different than her, the one that we mentioned earlier. Then we have Odin with the cleanse, and I believe it's the cleanse, and the lightning damage now, which is very strong. You have a really old one, but still pretty good, the Human Torch with the fire damage. You also have the Ghost Panther with the fire damage, and then rounding out the list, you have, of course, the super classic Misty Knight with the cold damage, essentially exclusively for Luna Snow. And last but not least, I have to correct myself. I don't know what I was thinking. Human Torch is fire resist, not fire damage, so he doesn't deserve to be on this list at all. So there you go. It's the list. It's 100 characters deep. Now that we got rid of Human Torch, it's a clean 100, so I guess that was my plan all along. I just didn't know it. It was hidden in the subconscious there. Hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know what you think of this gargantuan leadership tier list. What would you change? What would you exclude? What would you include? Thank you so much for watching. Smash the like button if you enjoyed the content, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.